Okay, so as you hopefully remember, language paper 2 is our nonfiction paper, okay? Meaning that we are looking at two texts that are nonfiction and comparing the two. Now, for today, we're just looking at question 5, which is the writing portion, meaning when you have to write your own nonfiction piece. Okay, so let's have a quick reminder of timings and what we're looking for. So this is supposed to be 45 minutes of your time. Okay, for the full exam, language paper 2, you have an hour and 45 minutes. Okay, and 45 minutes you want to spend on the writing section. Now, a lot of people start taking away writing time and using it for the reading section because they've noticed that they run over when they're answering the questions in the reading section, and therefore they have less time for the writing section. Now, the reason that that can be dangerous is because both sections are worth the same amount. So that writing section, although for some people it may feel like something that is easier to accomplish or something that doesn't need as much revision, it is worth 40 marks, and so is the reading section in total is worth 40 marks. So it's crucial that you spend the amount of time you should be spending on this writing portion, okay? So 45 minutes. Now, this is how I would suggest breaking up your time. Obviously, these times will vary slightly depending on how quick you are or depending on what you need to focus on, but I would use 10 of those 45 minutes to plan your response. Now, a lot of students always ask me if the examiners mark the plan. So do they look at your plan and do they give you a grade for the plan? The answer is no. You don't get a grade for your actual planning. However, I have seen time and time again where students don't plan and then actually they receive lesser marks for structure because they haven't thought about how they're going to start and end their article or letter or leaflet, and therefore they struggle within that time period to complete a whole non-fiction text. Okay, so 10 minutes planning and then 30 minutes actually writing the non-fiction piece. Okay, so whatever it is that you're being asked to do, you write for 30 minutes. And then those last 5 minutes you spend editing. So whether that is looking at capitalization, whether that is looking at vocabulary, spelling, you are allowed to cross out words, respell them, cross out words, and think of better words to make it sound more interesting, more engaging, more detailed. You are most definitely allowed to cross out. Of course, you don't want to confuse your examiner by having a million words crossed out. But please do go back and show the examiner that you have taken those extra 5 minutes at the end to really think about if every word is perfectly matched to your purpose, and if the punctuation is good, and if you've used a range of punctuation and not just full stop, full stop, full stop, comma, comma, comma. Have you really thought about integrating question marks and exclamation marks, and have you put in maybe quotations from other sources, things like that? We'll get to that in a second. So you have 5 minutes to then edit. Okay, so now we think about how do we start that first 10 minutes where we're planning? What do we have to consider when we plan? Well, we have to think about VTAP. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about VTAPs. Your teacher have told you about VTAP, but VTAP is a very easy way to plan. It stands for voice, tone, audience, purpose. So when you see your question, I want you to be able to identify the voice in which you're speaking, the tone in which you're speaking, the audience that this should be for, and the purpose of your overall writing. Okay, and we'll get a little bit more into what that means in a second. But I want you to think about what would be appropriate for the text type that you are given. So can anyone attempt to tell me what they think I mean when I say voice? What do I mean with think about the voice that you want to write this as? Any ideas? Good. Persona. Very good. Your perspective. Good, Lucia. Who you are, who's speaking. Brilliant. So you have to think about who you are writing as, who your character is, or if you are writing as yourself. You'll see on the next slide that you can become very detailed when you're thinking about who is writing and what voice you're writing from. Okay, the character you're writing as, Gabriella says, which is perfect. Okay, so for example, I'll go back to the VTAP in a second, but voice. Some of the things you might want to think about are, what's the age of the person you're writing as? Now, these things seem like maybe little small details, but they will make a big difference when you start writing. It will come a lot smoother to how you are writing. Some of these same ideas can go for when you're writing your fiction pieces, your short stories, but this is specifically for nonfiction. So, who are you and how old are you? Because if you are writing, for example, a letter, it's going to be very different if you're writing a letter as a 55-year-old woman with 3 children, or if you're writing a letter as a 16-year-old student. So you want to think about what's your perspective, what's your opinion, what's your narrative, who are you speaking as, like all of you have said. Okay? Same thing with gender, especially if maybe the topic is related to gender stereotypes. Well, whose perspective are you coming as? Now, remember, you never have to be yourself in this exam. So you don't need to write as if it's you and your perspective. You can take on someone else's perspective. And actually, a lot of the times, that's more interesting to have a different perspective than your own, okay? Which is what examiners see quite often is people use, I am a 15, 14-year-old girl writing a letter to my head of the school. And instead, you could write a letter from the perspective of a student's parents, which might be more interesting. So gender, age, occupation. So if you are someone, if you're mentally going in as if you are someone older, then think about also what occupation do they have and why maybe that would link to the topic that you're discussing. So occupation meaning job. What job do they have? If it's about schools reopening, right now, is it somebody that works in central London and needs to go into central London in order to do their job and hopes that schools reopen because their children need to be somewhere when they go into work? Or is this person a teacher and they're worried about the safety of other teachers and the students, and therefore their opinion is that they don't want schools to reopen? So think about the occupation. And that links into the last thing there, which is personal reasons for writing. And I think the person who said this best was Lucia, maybe? Yeah, your perspective. So why is it that the person that you've created in your mind and that you're becoming for 45 minutes, why is it that they feel passionate about writing whatever they're writing? What's their personal reason? So oftentimes I tell my class, think about, does your person have children? And if they have children, that might be one of the main reasons why they feel passionate about whatever subject. Maybe it's about technology being overused by teenagers. So if I'm a mother with 3 children who spend way too much time on their phones and not enough time with their parents, then I might have a very clear reason to be writing a letter or to be writing an article. So think about the personal reason for your voice to be writing. Now, the second part of that, as you see, the second bullet point says, stick to it. Oftentimes, what we see is when students create very strong voices that are really engaging and very passionate and fit perfectly with the purpose of the text type, sometimes they slip out of that persona and they start writing as themselves, as that student again. And that becomes very obvious for the examiner. And they see that they go back and forth between your own voice and this voice that you've created. and that actually won't help you gain any marks because you haven't really fit one voice, one perspective, one narrative. Now remember, the main idea of this section, right, question 5, is to be engaging and persuasive. And by having kind of a flip-flop voice, like going back and forth between two voices, or even going back and forth between two opinions, doesn't make it very persuasive. It makes it informative, but it doesn't make it very persuasive, which is usually what question 5 is asking you to do. Okay, so that's the voice that you're creating. Then we have the tone. Can anyone tell me what tone would mean in this case? Any ideas of what I mean with tone? You can give me an example, or you can attempt to explain what you think it means. Any ideas? Formality. Good, Madison. Formality, yes, definitely. That is part of it. You do want to stay formal, always. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't make, for example, examples that link to teenage life, but your language does need to remain formal. Good, there we go, Lucia, Sophie, well done, Samira, well done. Okay, so a lot of it has to do with how you are writing the emotions, right? As Sophie pointed out and Lucia pointed out. What is your emotion in this? Are you writing an angry letter? Has something angered you? Okay, good. I see it, how your piece comes across. Good, so that links to emotion. So are you writing an angry letter? Are you writing a grateful letter? Are you grateful for someone? Are you writing a longing letter? Are you missing someone? Are you trying to convince someone to do something for you? Or are you just telling them how upset you are? Are you really excited about a trip and that's why you're writing an excited email? Or are you angry and writing a complaint email? So that's your tone. And why, the reason you want to do that during your planning time is write down the tone you want to write in, is because you want to stick to that tone, okay, in general. Of course, you can slip in a few things there, here and there, but you want to stick to one tone to make it very clear to your examiner that you know the voice you've chosen and you know how they feel about that topic. So for example, I just saw, I think it's Victory, I just saw her picture, if you can see her picture on the Zoom session, which is the Black Lives Matter movement symbol, right? And if it's, for example, writing a letter to the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of the UK about the protest of Black Lives Matter, you might decide that you are a 25-year-old, recently graduate university student who's very passionate about supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, and your tone is anger. You're angry that the government hasn't done anything, okay? So if that's the voice that you're taking, and if the tone is anger, you should try to keep that tone throughout the whole letter. Of course, sometimes you might want to put a more happy tone when you're making a suggestion of what the government can do next. So you might want to come across as maybe even complimentary to the government if you're trying to convince them to do something for you. But then the majority of the rest of your letter should be angry, if that's the tone you're going for. And that means you're going to select your words very carefully to make sure that that tone stays throughout the whole thing. Then we have audience. Now, a lot of times people think that this is the simplest thing, but it's very important that you acknowledge what that means. So why is it important? Let's see some responses. Why is it important to know who your audience is? So who you're writing for or who you're going to speak in front of. Why is that important? Good. Sophie says you need to know things like their age. So you understand how they feel. May says because you address them differently and they have different opinions. Very good. So the idea is if you know who your audience is, you're going to be able to connect with them easily, to address them properly. Good. And so you use the right vocabulary. Now, in this case, you're very right that it would help you use the right vocabulary. but you never want to be informal, like you guys already pointed out. You always want to stay formal, even if you're talking to a group of your peers, okay? Because it is still an exam, and the examiners want to know that you can use formal language, right? But you guys are very right. I can see someone says you can relate the piece to them. That's one of the most important things. If I am writing as a teenager who's giving a speech to a lot of other teenagers, then my examples need to fit that audience, right? I'm not going to start using, maybe I won't start using a lot of, I don't know, references to a lawyer's job position and examples of documents and things like that, if I don't think the majority of my audience is going to understand that. But I do know that my teenage audience, just like me, is very interested about criminal documentaries, right? So I might make reference to that because I know that they're very interested. So if I know my audience, I will know how to engage them. If I'm speaking to a head teacher, I'm going to be speaking very differently than if I speak to my peers. Even if I remain formal in both situations, I will be using different kinds of language techniques, which we'll get to in a second, right? So that's our audience. So if you are writing a school speech for your year group, can anyone give me some examples of images, references you might make in order to properly target that audience, your year group? What might be things that you might bring up to make everyone engaged and everyone want to participate in your speech? Any ideas? Okay, good. So I know it's a school speech, so I might use examples that have to do with school. I might use things like uniform or the amount of time you get for lunch to make links to what I want to talk about. Social media, we all know that social media is being used. Well done, Abigail. Particular people, yeah, I could even use names and give examples. Probably don't want to call them out for something bad in front of the whole rest of the year group, but definitely using particular people, whether it's people in the room or celebrities that everyone knows. Everyone knows, good, Zainab, there we go. Stress of GCSEs. So things that that audience would link to. Right, now I'm going to be very careful with the next thing I say. So keep your comments appropriate. But what if you're writing an article for the Daily Mail? Okay, the newspaper, the Daily Mail. What kind of references might you make and why? Okay, what might you say and how would you get that audience interested? Okay, issues on the world, good because it is a newspaper. Political references, very good, May. Catchy headlines, good, Christabel. We know that they're very famous for the catchy, sometimes controversial headlines. And Zainab, you're very right. A lot of references to celebrities, Black Lives Matter, rumors. Okay, so I see a lot of good things. I can see exaggerated headlines. Good, Aisha. So there are a lot of things that are particular here, and you're thinking about the audience, okay, that would pick up this newspaper. And Lucia, you are very right. Meghan Markle, they do love to talk about them. So you would pick up this newspaper if you are someone who is interested maybe in that kind of catchy headline, a little bit of this rumor and gossip style conversation from the author. So if you are given that as your audience in an exam, then you want to think about that and make your language fit that. What about a blog post for parent advice? What kind of links might you make? What kind of examples might you make? A blog post for parent advice. Anecdotes, yeah, good. So stories that have happened to you, right? And how you've dealt with it. Tips on how to control your kids, very good. Okay, thanks, Jalen. Right, so if you think about anything that has to do with parenting, could May complain a lot realistically. All right, so if that is the reason for your blog post, so if it's a blog post about what kids do wrong, then yes, you're probably going to be complaining a lot. Good. And last one, what about a speech for a head teacher and all the rest of the teachers? What might be your references here? Let's pretend you're writing as a student, as yourselves. What might the references be? How students feel. Good. So it's you as a student writing to a head teacher, so you might talk about how students feel. How else would you convince them? Good, very good, May. So reference something they personally taught you so that you're able to engage them and say, I always listen to you. Listen here. This is how I'm complimenting you on your teaching abilities. Now listen to what I want. Good. Government statistics on schools. Very good. Logos. Yeah, I might use the whole success and happiness logo of Elton Hill School so that I can try to convince Ms. Palmore to make uniforms optional, right? So I might use the school's ideas against them in a way. Very good. And you can see at the bottom there, I did write, always write formally. I know a lot of people always ask, if I'm writing to a group of my friends, then I want to not write as formally. I understand that. For exam purposes, please do write formally because you will not get as good marks for your spelling, your grammar, your punctuation if you write informally. All right. And the last thing on here is purpose. What is the main purpose that I've already mentioned that most question 5s ask you to do? Does anyone know? What is the main purpose of a question 5, the writing section? What are they testing on? Your ability to, very good, Madison, persuade. Okay, so the main purpose you're gonna find is persuade. Sophie, good, convince. Sometimes you have something like inform, but essentially you're always going to want to persuade. Now, when you're planning and you do this VTAP, you can always just write it on your exam paper like this, VTAP, and then fill it in. So what is my voice? I might be a 45-year-old married woman. Okay, so I just put that next to my W, like that. Then I go to my tone. I'm very angry. I go to my audience. It's other mothers. And my purpose is to persuade them to, 45? Persuade them to leave this parenting group because the head of the parenting group is not very nice to me. That's not a great example, but you understand. What is the purpose? To persuade them to leave, to persuade them to join, to persuade them to buy, to persuade them to take a stand, right? So a lot of different purposes. Okay, so it is also very important that you know your text type. So that was VTAP. Now we go to text type. So these are the 5 most common text types that would come up in a question 5. Somebody is not on mute. Please make sure you mute yourselves, guys. Okay, so those are our 5 text types: an article, right, for a broadsheet, a newspaper, a letter, a speech, an essay, and a leaflet. Now, we haven't really seen an essay, and I always tell my year 10s that it's very unlikely that you would get an essay. However, if you do get an essay, you're actually lucky because you practice how to write essays every day in all of your subjects, right? So they might say, write an informative essay about plate tectonics. It's knock on wood, they wouldn't do that. But if they do so, you know that you would just write 3 petal paragraphs essentially, and you could make up the information if you weren't very sure on it. Okay, so then we have an article for a broadsheet, a speech, an essay, a leaflet. They're all very different. Make sure you have a look online at some examples of what a leaflet looks like in order to understand what that is. But it's essentially a brochure, right, in order to get someone to join a group or to buy a vacation or to inform them about recycling or something like that, okay? Think about, I always give this example, think about when you get on a bus and somebody hands you that leaflet about joining their church. That is what a leaflet looks like, and it's there to inform and persuade you, right? Okay, if you're writing something like a letter, make sure that it's very obvious to your examiner that you know what a letter is, meaning you start off with dear blank and you end with yours sincerely blank. Okay, if you're writing a speech, you might want to start with good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon, the head of Eltham Hill School. Make it very formal depending on who your audience is. If it's a group of friends, you might say, thanks everyone for joining me, let's get started, right? So it doesn't have to be that formal. Okay, if you're writing a broadsheet article, what are something you should do at the top of that article to make sure your examiner is very aware that you are writing an article, that you know your text type? Good, thank you, Sarah. A headline, and underneath that headline, you write any ideas? A subheading, thank you guys. So you have your heading at the top and then you have your subheading. Now that heading is what a lot of you were talking about, is the controversial kind of catchy phrase that goes at the very top of the newspaper that gets people's opinions. Daisy, I've muted you because you unmuted yourself. Okay, so underneath that, in the subheading, you have a little section where you're able to explain what the article is really about. So I'm going to give you an example. If I've said that write an article about the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And I might make my heading something very controversial, right? Something that people would be like, what did they just say? So that they feel like they have to read the rest of the article to understand. So I write something like, do Black lives really matter? Question mark. And of course I'm going to argue that they do, but it gets people to be like, excuse me, what did you just say? And so they're going to read the rest of my article. And then the subheading underneath that question, I might write, we need to think about all of the perspectives out in the world. But even with all of these perspectives, we know the only right answer is Black Lives Matter. So that might be my little explanation there. And then I start writing my actual article. Okay, so the subheading explains what you're actually talking about, and the heading is there to grab their attention. Usually I always recommend to make it controversial. Okay, right. Then we have to think about structure. Now this is where you get to those top marks. This is where examiners understand that you've really planned out and thought about your article or letter or speech. You've thought about how you're going to structure it. Now, part of that is, how are you going to build your arguments? You want to have a clear idea of two or three strong arguments that are different. Because otherwise, it just sounds like you keep saying the same thing over and over again, just in different ways. And the reason that that is weak is because then people question if your opinion is actually backed up, supported. If all you can do is come up with one example, or all you can do is come up with one reason why they should believe your opinion. So you want at least like 3 strong arguments. Now, you can decide, there's not a right answer to this, but you can decide what comes first. Should your first paragraph be your strongest argument, or should your last paragraph be the strongest argument? That is up to you. There's not a right answer. Either you start with your strongest, or you leave your strongest to last, depending on the effect you want on your examiner, okay? But it's important for you to think about that. I wouldn't recommend putting your strongest in the middle, because sometimes that gets lost between the two. So make sure it's either first or last, Zainab, okay? So then remember to prove you know the text type with the structure, meaning, again, have you put the heading and the subheading to prove that you know it's an article? Have you put the dear blank to prove you know it's a letter? Okay. You do never need to write in columns, even if it is a newspaper, even if it is a leaflet. You do not get marks for that, and a lot of the time it actually makes people waste time. Okay, so please do not spend time writing or drawing columns. Sometimes people like to draw empty boxes in their exam, and pretend like there's a picture in here, and they might write in the paragraph, as seen in the picture on the left, blah, 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 but they don't spend time drawing it in here. They can just write picture 1 in the actual box, right? And they can see, as you can see in picture 1, to make reference, if in a newspaper you're used to seeing that, you can definitely do that. It will give you marks for knowing your text type, but don't spend time drawing a graph or writing or drawing a picture, okay? That's just a waste of your time. But another quick thing for high marks is just one technique. You don't have to do this, but a cyclical but slight change. Does anyone know what I mean with that? If I say structure your article or structure your letter as cyclical with a slight change. Any idea? Maybe I've worded it slightly weird, but any idea of what that might mean? Yeah, good. May says, otherwise it's just repetition. Very good. Yeah, I don't want to just repeat the exact same, but here is an example of what I mean with cyclical but a slight change. Let's again use this idea that I am talking about Black Lives Matter. And the whole article or the whole speech, let's say I'm writing a speech, is to get people, to persuade people to become part of the protest. Let's say that's my aim, that's my purpose. And at the beginning, I start off by saying, imagine a world where people don't feel respected. Imagine a world where you don't get to eat in the same restaurant as somebody else. Imagine a world where a government gives preference to someone just because the color of their skin. This is the world we live in, right? That's how I start my speech. And I might end my speech with, imagine a world where everyone feels free to make their own decisions. Imagine a world where everyone feels safe to express their opinions. This is a world we can create through protesting. Okay? Very nice. Guys, by the way, if you're drawing on the slides, I do know who is drawing. So make sure you are doing very appropriate things. That was appropriate. Black Lives Matter. Okay, so do you see how I took this idea of imagine a world where, but I changed it. At the beginning of my speech, it was negative, but I'm going to persuade the audience to make it a positive world. So the end, I'm getting them to imagine a positive world. Thumbs up, smiley faces if you understood that, right? So cyclical, similar, but with a different twist on it. Thanks, Sarah. I see your thumbs up. Okay, very good, glad. So that is one trick of how to show your examiners that you have thought about your structure. Okay, we're gonna go for about 10 more minutes, guys, so bear with me. Some of the language techniques, now I'm sure a lot of you have seen the A-forest structure before, or the A-forest idea there, the concept that has all of these techniques in it. A stands for anecdotes or alliteration, F for facts, O opinion, R rhetorical questions repetition, E emotive language, S structure or sibilance, and T tone or triplets. Now it's just a good way to remember a lot of techniques that can be used to persuade people. Quick hint, examiners do not like it when you write this down on your exam and then check it off when you use each of the techniques. The examiners don't want to feel like you force techniques into your work. I know that sounds kind of contradictory because of course they're marking you if you're able to use techniques, but they don't want them to feel forced. So in your head, if you can remember a forest and sometimes incorporate some of these techniques, but not make it so often that it feels very forced. Okay, can everyone still see the slides? Because Hannah says she can't see the slide. Okay, Hannah, you might just have to look at afterwards when it gets recorded. Okay, so please make sure that again, you think about these ideas because they are good things to incorporate. For example, of course, it's a good idea to incorporate a rhetorical question if you use it properly. However, you don't want to make every single third or every other sentence a rhetorical question because it gets old quite quickly. I'm sure you've noticed if you've read someone else's work or if you've read an article that constantly uses rhetorical questions, at some point you feel like, okay, I don't want you to question me anymore. I just want you to inform me. Okay, or tell me now, stop asking me. If you're not even going to be there to talk to me, then now tell me the answer, right? So you don't want to overdo it. Anecdotes, for those of you who are not sure, are personal stories. So I might give a personal story about me. Remember, you're not yourself. You might be a 45-year-old married woman. So a 45-year-old married woman's personal story of the time her children fell out of the trolley, okay? And then I give a detailed story and link it to the purpose of my article or the purpose of my speech. Quick thing at the top of that slide, you'll see it says, remember, do not say I agree with this statement. I see that way too often. A lot of the times it says things like, you'll see in the next slide, the example is homework has no value. Okay, write a article or write a speech about this, agreeing or disagreeing with the statement. You do not start an article. I don't think anyone has ever seen an article that starts off with, I agree with the statement. Okay? You have to pretend that there is no statement, that you are writing an article, and you can use that statement as your inspiration for the article. Okay? You do not need to ever mention the statement explicitly. Just use the ideas that are in it. Please never write, I agree with the statement because, or I disagree with the statement because. You don't want to make it obvious that there was a statement because no newspaper does that. There's no statement there. No letter does that, okay? If you're really desperate to use the quote, then say something like, Marissa, age 26, said homework had no value on my life. I disagree with Marissa because that works, but don't say I agree with the statement, okay? And last thing at the bottom there on the right, as I already said, don't follow this as a list that you just check off, but also the best articles and the best letters and the best speeches, I'm sure you've heard them, a lot of them now with the Black Lives Matter movement and all the time throughout life, right? We've seen these impressive speeches about motivation or about empowerment, and some of the best techniques they use are not on that list there, but are more metaphorical language. So think about metaphors that you can use, right? 2 examples. We might not agree with Boris Johnson's speech, but some of the metaphors he used are very clear. So for example, if you can remember when you were doing the homework on Boris Johnson's speech and you saw him discuss COVID-19 and the spread as an invisible killer. And he used it throughout his speech multiple times. Okay, so that by the end, a lot of people now know exactly what invisible killer means. And it's metaphorically done. So he uses that to build up this kind of horrible image of this infection, right? Another example, we've seen it a lot of times with the Black Lives Matter movement. If anyone has seen the link or the example being used there, the analogy of the house on fire, and why would you put water on the house next to it that isn't on fire just to prevent it if the house currently that's on fire is the one that needs to be saved? Because a lot of people were saying, don't say all lives matter, say Black Lives Matter, right? And that's the analogy they gave. Now, we don't need to discuss whether that's right or wrong, but you can see that they use metaphorical language. They linked it to this idea of a house on fire to really explain it. And it makes it engaging and persuasive because I'm able to imagine exactly what you mean. And also kind of makes it comical because why would I be putting water on a house that doesn't have any fire on it at all, right? It's not on fire. So it makes the situation sound ridiculous in order to prove a point. So good thing is to use a metaphor or metaphorical language. If you want to take it up a notch and you go for those top grades again, think about the extended metaphor, just like with the invisible killer. Can you keep repeating to the same metaphor throughout? but not make it feel like you've just repeated yourself over and over again. Use the invisible killer in a few different ways, right? Okay, the last thing I want to do is go for a few examples so you know exactly what I was talking about. This is one question. For example, homework has no value. Some students get it done for them. Some don't do it at all. Students should be relaxing in their free time. Write an article for a broadsheet newspaper in which you explain your point of view on this statement. Okay, so you want to take on a voice, right? You want to decide, are you in favor of homework or are you not in favor of homework? Maybe if you're a parent yourself and you have experienced your children suffering with homework, maybe you think that there should be less homework. Maybe that's your opinion. Or maybe you are a parent who needs your kids to be distracted when you're at home because you still have to work till quite late. Then maybe you think homework is really necessary. Maybe you're someone who just graduated university and can see the clear benefit of homework, or you don't. You absolutely think it was a waste of your time. So think about, who is your voice, what is your purpose, and what is your text type. So there I have an article. I need to make sure I have my headline, my subheading, and then I'm gonna go in with my voice. All right. Second one, let's see who can answer this. So arts education has no place in schools. Students need to spend all their time learning the basics of English and mathematics. So if I'm going to get to you in 1 second, write a letter to the head teacher of your school, either for or against this statement. So who are you? Who do you have to write as? They've kind of made it more specific in this case. Any ideas? Who is the voice in this case? Good, very good. You are a student. You have to be a student because this is your school, right? So write a letter to the head of your school. You know who your audience is. Who's my audience? Any ideas? Who's my audience? Head teacher, very good. So I'm going to be very formal and use ideas. Interesting. May just said something. I'll get there in a second. So yeah, so I have a formal audience. May said, what if you're a teacher? You definitely can do that little twist. It would be very interesting and engaging for an examiner. It says your school, so I might be a teacher and have an opinion about that. And here is the answer to everyone, because I see the same question coming up over and over again, which is, can you agree and disagree? Now, here's my response to that. I would avoid that, just because when you go back and forth between the two perspectives, a lot of the time you lose that ability to persuade, okay? Even though you are all smart enough to see both sides of an argument, the examiners are not questioning if you're able to see both sides of an argument. They're there to see, are you able to persuade? And if you're writing a letter to your head teacher, you're obviously, whoever you are, you're very passionate about that subject, okay? So you want to take on the voice of that person and not be yourself, because you yourself probably understand both sides. That's why it's important to become a voice that has a very strong opinion. You might say something like, those who disagree with me might say blah, 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 because then you can show what the other perspective is. And I can see Allison said that. She sent it to me alone privately, but she's very right. So you could say some people might think blah, 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 but then make sure you go against that, because you want to have a strong stance and a strong opinion that is passionate and persuasive. Okay, so even if you both understand both sides, take one side. I see that as doing much better in an exam setting. Right, so write a letter to the head teacher. You guys picked that up quite quickly. So we have, it is a letter, it is for a head teacher, and you are the student, okay? And last one. Floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, and landslides. We see more and more reports of environmental disasters affecting the world and its people every day. Write the text of a speech for a debate at your school or college in which you persuade young people to take more responsibility for protecting the environment. Right. Who are you? Okay, so think VTAP. Who are you? Who's your voice? It's a little bit Good, May, you are a student, right? So you're in a debate, you're in your school, you're a student. Good. Now think about your tone. What are you trying to do here? You're watching more and more environmental disasters happen. Good. Lucia, persuade is going to be more so your purpose, but what is your tone that you're taking on? Up to you. Cheyenne says serious. Okay, very good. Serious. What's the emotion behind that? Urgency. I like that, Madison. So that might be my emotion. I'm very panicked about people not doing enough about it. Anger. Good. Frustration. So when you think about tone, think about the emotion that you want to bring out and the emotion you want your audience to feel. Okay, good. And then we got to the audience. You guys already answered that. So it's people in your school, it's in a debate. And then Lucia said the purpose, which is obviously to persuade. It even says it in the question. All right. So guys, hopefully that helped you think about a few of the points that are good to think about before you even start writing your response. A lot of it is going to have to do with you going out there. I know some of you say you don't have time, but I promise you, you do. Going out there and reading an article, going out there and reading some letters online, some example letters, okay? Or picking up a pamphlet that you see on the ground and looking through it. Maybe sanitize your hands before and after, but looking through it and seeing what it looks like, what a leaflet looks like, and what it actually is formatted as, okay? Make sure you spend some time on this question, as I said at the beginning, 45 minutes. Don't try to rush this and do the written section in 20 minutes. It's worth 40 marks, so it's extremely important. All right, guys? Okay, hopefully that helped some of you who were struggling with this. I know sometimes it feels like a huge task when you see it. And next week, we will be starting to do a bit of a Christmas Carol revision, and I will send out the link for our next Zoom session soon. Smiley faces if you guys feel good, if that helped. Thank you. You're very welcome, Shay. All right. Good. I'm very glad. All right. See you guys very soon, and I will let you know and let your teachers know when the next Zoom session is and what it's going to be about. Right, enjoy the rest of your day, guys. You're welcome, all of you. Thank you for being here. I'm gonna stop sharing now. Okay, have a great day, guys.